Tricks I learned advising the rich. I worked at one of the largest tax firms in the world, and now I'll reveal to you what I learned. The main thing I learned was that it takes an entire career to learn many of these, and pretty much only the managing directors at the firm I worked were able to advise on this aspect in terms of tax avoidance, tax tricks. And even still, they would bring in their colleagues from different specialities when their clients had certain situations that they needed consultation on. Now, I still have some tax tricks that I consolidated for you, but if you're interested in working in this field to learn, just know that in the beginning, you'll just be looking at 1099s, K1s, and W2s, all just PDFs, and then typing the figures into Excel or some tax software the firm uses or owns. As an associate, you'll do some this data entry and also maybe check the work of anyone junior to you as you go up the ranks. So that's how it is from a hierarchy basis. And in case you didn't know, 1099s list stock and bond sales, the interest, the dividends. K1 includes income from a business partnership where instead of the business paying taxable profit and then you owning equity or getting dividends, essentially all the profit just flows through straight through the business and is proportionally distributed as income to each shareholder. Sort of like as if the company had a 100% dividend payout ratio, right? Like paying out all their profit in the form of dividends, but it is taxed instead of at the dividend tax rate of maybe 15 or 20%, it's taxed as your personal income, which is the same that you would get like a W-2 is the income you get from an employer. So it would be taxed the same as that. So back to the tax tricks. One I learned during university, actually, while studying finance, was about the corporate structure of Apple and how they pay like essentially zero tax on all foreign revenue that they bring in. So foreign profit, I should say profit, that they bring in from outside the US. And they do this by having an empty office in Ireland. So in order for an HQ to be taxed in Ireland, like a headquarters, so for example, Apple has the main consolidated public company, then they have a subsidiary in the US where all their US revenue is consolidated under. Then they have subsidiary headquartered in Ireland where all foreign income is consolidated under from any country. Now, in Ireland, in order for the headquarters to be taxed as the headquarters, you need to have at least one employed person. And if you don't, then you would be taxed at where like the main operations are, right? That's how Irish law works. But in the US, entities are taxed based off of the physical location of where you register the headquarters. So Ireland views Apple's subsidiary, where all the international revenue is consolidated, as having a HQ in America, where the main operations are, because they don't actually have any employees in Ireland under that HQ. So they do not tax them under that corporate entity. And then America views Apple's foreign subsidiary as having a HQ in Ireland, where it's registered. So they leave it to Ireland to tax them appropriately. So basically, they are subject to no tax because Ireland doesn't see them as under their tax jurisdiction, and America doesn't see them under their tax jurisdiction. And Apple can't do this with their US sales, though, because the American government won't let that slide and will tax any revenue actually generated in the country or any profit. So if you run a business that generates any sales from abroad, as long as it's sizable, consider creating a separate company registered in Ireland, for example, and having a parent company which consolidates your US business and your foreign businesses under one umbrella. But of course, like the cost of buying that real estate and registering and doing all this, like sorting out the legal paperwork, it needs to offset whatever tax savings you're actually getting from abroad, right? So it works for larger companies and corporations, but it doesn't make financial sense if you're a small business and you're pulling in, say, like 200K a year, which would be fine to live off of, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to do these tax tricks. Now, some tax tricks that I learned online and from social media actually include like the most common is the tax code section 179. This allows you to write off your car as being used for business purposes in the first year if it is over 6,000 pounds. And the most common car I see mentioned for this is the G-Wagon. But four things I want to note here. One is that you can still write off your other cars, but it's just over the course of 5 years. So it's just the advantage of writing off in 1 year. Second is that there are many cars besides the G-Wagon over 6,000 pounds, including Tesla Model X, Porsche Cayenne, if I said that right, multiple cars from Mercedes-Benz and BMW. The third thing is that you can write off the entire car even if you financed it. So say you bought 170,000 G-Wagon using 20% down, which is 34K. And then you write off the entire car and say you have a corporate tax rate of 26%. So you just save $46,000 in terms of taxes. So as long as your tax expense is going to be that much, so it's actually more than the down payment, what you just saved. So essentially, there's a period where you need to get the money for the down payment, but then when tax return comes around, you actually made money, right? And if you're growing your business earnings at a rate faster than the rate on the auto loan, then you effectively get paid to buy the car. And if you were a slow growth but have the cash, it still makes sense to finance the car for $34,000 down and then put the remaining 136,000 that you had into, say, a high yield corporate bond or dividend paying stocks, which ideally should yield higher than the auto loan, assuming that your credit is prime. So just a little financial math there. Lastly, you need to check that you used your vehicle for business purposes over 50% of the time on the tax form. I doubt this is factual in most cases where people use this Section 179, but I don't see any way the IRS could check or enforce this, and there's probably too much of this happening for them to even try. Now, if you do just have like a salary job and don't have a business, it's really hard to avoid taxes, to be perfectly honest, but what you can benefit from are the tax advantages in real estate for buying your first home, such as the 1031 exchange, where you roll over the taxes you pay on selling your property as long as it's going into your next property. And you can do this as long as you're living in the property. And I believe like every 2 years, say you sold a home that you were living in and don't have anything, and then 2 years later you buy another one, that can also count as like your first home again and can reapply that rule. So that's very advantageous. And yeah, basically none of these were actually from my work because, like I said, when I was actually working, so a bit misleading title, but when I was working, what I realized was that you just do a lot of data entry. And I learned more from university, from social media, things like this about tax tricks than I did from actually working for a tax firm that advised high net worth individuals. For example, one of the clients was Tom Brady. So I'm not going to say which firm, of course, but that's the example of some of the high net worth clients that we would be advising. But it includes people of all high net worth and all sorts of careers. Another thing with real estate, just if you didn't know, like you can also, for example, put 20% down, buy a property, and say like a 4 bedroom and live in one of the bedrooms and then rent out the other three and use that rental income to pay off the mortgage, right? And then once your equity in your house, your 4 unit house, 4 family house starts to grow, the limit is 4, by the way. If you get like a 5 unit, it doesn't count as like a primary residence anymore. So you lose a lot of the tax advantages. Also, there's like FHA loans in your first time buying. There's a lot of advantages for real estate as well as with inheritance, things like this, which I can go into later. This was an introductory, but also someone in my work, what he did was once he paid off a decent amount of the mortgage in his first house, so say $100,000 house, as an example, you had 20K in equity, and then you used the rental income and you paid off most of it. So the point where there's only 20K left on the mortgage. So you have 80K of equity now, right? And now you can actually get a home equity loan on that remaining, on that house and basically refinance the 20K mortgage out of there. So you get a refinance, you basically get a new home equity loan on the entire value of your house. So essentially on that 80K you can get, it might be less. You might not be able to get the full equity on the entire house. So let's say 60K, and then you can use that as cash for down payment on another house. So then you can use that 60K, the additional that you just got from that home equity loan, and put that down as down payment, 20% down. So 60K, 20% down, you can get a $300,000 house, right? Completely financed by debt. Now, the main thing you need to know is like, for one, you should have a job as well where you have some income so you can pay off the interest payments and you can pay off the principal payments, right? This is what one of my coworkers said. Just make sure you have enough income to support this because, there could be scenarios where you don't have tenants and where like rates are high, whatever it is, and the tenant income may not be enough, right? So you need to make sure you have some sort of stable income. That's what I would advise to be safe. This is a thing most people won't mention. If you're making a little tiny bit of money, like 50K job, 70K job, and living in a high cost living area, it probably won't be enough. If your tenant income is enough to pay it off, that's great, but I wouldn't really take that risk if you don't have stable income, right? Unless you really do the math and you're comfortable with it, but there can always be vacancies, whatever it may be. There could be troubles, renovations that need to happen, etc. So just something to pay attention to. But yeah, I'll go more into other tax rules, other sort of tips and tricks for personal finance, as well as when I was working, I did note down ideas that I did have. I didn't vet them with them because some of them are questionable, but I did note down like a lot of ideas I had when they would go over certain rules, and I think, oh, how can we leverage this to potentially avoid taxes? So I'll make a separate video on that because I had a decent amount of questions that I generated, and you can ponder them, use them, consult with your own tax people if useful. So that'll be for another video though. If this was helpful or some of the things that I mentioned, like Section 179, 1031 exchange, etc. Also Apple with their corporate tax, feel free to hit the like, hit the subscribe, comment down below if you think this is a waste of your time, or if you think, hey, at least I learned a few things, or if you want me to go more in depth to them, go deeper into different rules, I can do that too. But yeah, let me know. There's also a video if you really own a corporation, there's a video that really illustrates how to set up the essentially the corporate structure that most companies do in order to not just avoid taxes, but also avoid like personal liability, avoid getting sued if your company does go bankrupt, how to recoup a lot of the financials so it's not like you have to sell everything. And I'll link that video below, but there, let me find the video here. Pandora Papers work. Let me share my screen actually, just to show you guys. But yeah, this video right here, Buy How Many Works, they made a video called How Pandora Papers Actually Work. I'd advise watching that. They give a good rundown of corporate tax structure. Yeah, see you guys next time.